here on the Gulf Coast, communities know they're the front line of sea level rise.
We're seeing more water. We're seeing more frequent storms. We're seeing the ferocity of storms increase. We're seeing like rainfall dumps.
We have to make people knowledgeable, get them engaged.
We can't just sit back and allow those changes to happen. We want to be in the best shape to adapt.
There's a lot of things we can do, and we ought to do, to make ourselves protected and more resilient and to live with a changing climate. I grew up in Pinellas County in a little town called Crystal Beach. When I was growing up, it was still a fishing village. It was horse farms. It was citrus groves. But they're not there anymore. One of the biggest impacts that we've had has to do with people moving here. You don't just plop 3 million people in a watershed and expect to not have any negative effects. The biggest thing that makes Tampa Bay vulnerable to climate change is the number of people and the proximity to the coast. 700 miles of shoreline, 3 million people, and we've built some of our most expensive properties right there on the water's edge. You see a foot or two of sea level rise, and all of those people and those properties are at risk.
As climate change raises ocean temperatures and sea levels rise, we'll see wetter hurricanes that have more water and energy available to flood and damage the land. Where Ian made landfall, Florida saw more than 12 feet of storm surge. But extreme weather events in Florida don't just mean stronger hurricanes or tropical storms. It includes extreme rainfall that can flood areas in several inches of water within an hour. It would also mean stronger heat waves or drought. If we don't adapt now, stronger storms will likely damage the Tampa Bay area's private and public infrastructure. Extreme weather might increase the risk of wastewater overflows, resulting in poor water quality and threats to our public health. Rising sea levels could lead to permanent inundation, threatening our beaches, our coastal ecosystems, low-lying areas, and even our freshwater drinking supply. We must prepare for what's to come. That's why we're learning about climate adaptation and resilience from community leaders across the Gulf of Mexico, starting with Galveston Bay, Texas.
I grew up on the water, going to the beach, going fishing. Although Galveston Bay is pretty far from where I grew up, there's a lot of similarities. The long-term worry for Galveston Bay really is water quantity, not having enough fresh water flowing into Galveston Bay. Galveston Bay is the largest estuary in Texas, and what that means is we have fresh water from our rivers and bayous flowing in from our watershed into the bay. It mixes with the salt water from the Gulf of Mexico, and it creates an incredibly productive area. We've restored over 70 acres of coastal marsh here in Dollar Bay. One technique we used is to create something that breaks the wave action. And so we brought a rock breakwater in. We've planted some marsh grass. Sediment will build up between the rock breakwater and the existing shoreline, and the marsh grass will be able to repopulate and provide another layer of buffer. So we're on a conserved piece of property that's about 106 acres. Was actually slated to have construction of a new subdivision, but preserving it gives a lot more benefit for certainly water quality in Moses Lake and Dollar Bay, and the people who live behind us now have the benefit of having a natural buffer which protects them from a potential storm surge. Our collective goal is to make sure we have healthy estuaries right now that can be resilient and that can adapt as well as possible to climate change.
This is a plant that we break the leaves and we cook it like you do spinach, and it's our favorite food. I am a Takape Shakshuwasha. I am descended from a people that have been in this region for centuries. We used to be forested, but with sea level rise, we've given way to saltwater marsh. Those are some remnant trees, and they died off because of subsidence and saltwater intrusion. So we call it the bones of the forest. So this is part of the forest that used to be back when this landscape was elevated and forested. We were forested from the ridge all the way to the river. We call this lemon tree mound, and ever since I was a little kid, you know, I heard stories of this place from my dad, and when our fishermen would come into this bay, they had lemon trees on this site, and they would pick lemons and make lemonade. The place is still sacred to us because it's part of our history. These oyster shell sacks that I'm standing on today, the bags will help to break up the wave action going into the mound and help to preserve it a little bit longer. This living shoreline will not only protect the land and grow more oysters, but oysters are bivalves and they help to filter the water. It encourages other marine life to congregate there. It's a win-win-win all the way around. We see the land disappearing, so even our homes are on pylons 14 feet high. The electricals, they're all the way up on the side of the houses. We have to be innovative to replace and rebuild for the next decade of storms. Can't keep on hardening these structures and not expect them to fail at some point. It will come a time, I don't care. You know, people say, well, it hasn't happened here in the last 40 years. I've been here 40 years, 50 years, and nothing like that has happened. Well, things are changing. Learn about your environment. Acknowledge what you're dealing with so people are not caught unaware.
At the Tampa Bay Estuary Program, water quality has been the key thing that we've been focused on, and we really address water quality primarily by reducing nutrient pollution to the bay. In the 1960s and 70s, 60 Minutes actually declared Tampa Bay dead. It's shown here on this map by most of the bay being colored red. And that essentially means that the water wasn't very clear. There was a lot of algae that was growing in the bay, and it wasn't able to support seagrass at acres that we see it today. That's how we were created, to help routinize the water quality monitoring, the seagrass monitoring, and help keep the region all sort of pointed in the right direction towards recovery. There are a lot of really important lessons that we've learned from how we've tackled poor water quality in the Tampa Bay watershed. I think the biggest lesson for me is cooperating, coming together. We don't try and do all of this on our own as the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. We do this as a partnership, volunteer kind of effort.
This lower Ninth Ward was on the news because it was the most destroyed community from Hurricane Katrina. The water here was 25 feet high.
Storm surge has definitely had a serious impact on the lower Ninth Ward. In Katrina, I had one friend of mine whose house was lifted completely up. And as it floated down the street, he was able to see the top of those telephone poles. So that kind of tell you how high this water was.
After a hurricane, after it's over, there's this kind of eerie quietness. With no electricity, there is no air conditioners, no fans, the weather is not cool, and so the food that's in your refrigerator is probably no longer any good. And then it's the cleanup. It requires a commitment for community and for volunteers and for students to do the work. So what we're doing today is an exercise with our interns of planting grasses. It helps to build greater coastal restoration.
The bulrush, it's good for the ecosystem because in the case of storm surges and flooding, it will absorb a lot of the shock that you'll get from it. And also, it serves as like a habitat for birds and fish and bugs and such, which will help rejuvenate the ecosystem that we have here.
We have to continue to build our future, which is our youth, and help them to understand the importance of the environment.
You see it?
Yeah.
And then you can come back in a year.
And they'll all be 5 feet wide.
Yeah, it's just amazing to think that, like, we actually did that, you know?
Good. You actually did it.
We are a off-campus center for the College of Architecture, Art and Design at Mississippi State University. After Katrina, we began to realize more fully the specific challenge of extreme rainfall. People know that when it rains a lot, that the sewer kind of comes back up out of manholes. Once we change and create all these harder surfaces, that natural process no longer works on its own. Bayou Auguste is a relatively small waterway, but an important one because it comes right into the community. Our project essentially reshaped the bayou from being a straight channel to being a channel where the water meanders, it goes slower, has more edges. Since this work, every time we have big storms, there's plenty of room to handle all that floodwater. In fact, these environments do well with being inundated. Green infrastructure can have great benefits. It's become pretty clear that the most resilient stormwater systems use nature to help store, slow down the stormwater, and then to keep us from contributing to the pollution and impacts the natural environment.
When we create these situations where storms are more intense or more frequent, or it's hot and we're uncomfortable, or our water's not clean enough to drink or to have fun, those are all things that aren't good for us. They're obviously not good for the earth.
We need to build our resilience to a changing climate, like adding green infrastructure to treat our stormwater and protecting our coasts by planting wetlands, installing living shorelines, and conserving our native lands.
As a community, we need to know, yeah, this is a great place to live, a beautiful place to live, but we lose the habitat, if we lose the water quality, you're not going to enjoy those things any longer, and you're going to wonder what happened.
One of the lessons learned is that nature will do its part really well. And it's kind of a wonderful lesson to realize how resilient nature is.
We have to try to convince our political leaders that we need nature to protect our community.
Mitigate beyond the next circumstance. Share information, share knowledge, listen to the knowledge holders.
We're really going to have to get serious about what adapting to climate change looks like for anybody who wants to live here 20, 30, 50 years into the future.